Hey, what's going on, guys? So we are up for part two on when people visit. And so this time we're going to really focus on the preacher and what you do in a normal lesson or sermon or just through your process of teaching. So that's what's up today on Help Me Preach. Okay, so we talked last time about teaching that can be understood, and some of the process of encouraging, and exhorting. So you're turning away from sin, you're building people up, you're encouraging them to do what's right. But today, what I want to do is give you some practical tips for what you do with your lessons, and these are a good reminder for me to keep in mind as I go through lessons and prepare them, but hopefully they'll give you a lot of help as you think about your teaching. So let's kind of build off of what we talked about last time, where we talk about teaching that can be understood. Now, what we mean by that is you're in the process of communicating. You're taking an idea and you're trying to make sure people in the audience get that same idea. You're painting a picture. You have a picture in your mind, an idea, a concept, and you're going through and painting that in their mind so that they see it. One thing that can cause problems in that is using words that people can't understand. Now, this is an interesting deal. I've been learning Spanish, and so I don't know if you knew that or not, but I've been working on it. And it's interesting to me that as I'm reading and I'm looking at different contexts and looking at it from a different language, that there are a lot of words that I don't know. But there are words that are similar that I may know. And there's just differing sets of vocabulary. And I understand you don't want to have just a very limited vocabulary and all of that. But the problem is the people in your audience may have a limited vocabulary. And so you need to use words that can be understood. Or if you're going to use a word, at least explain it. And so some of this you're not going to be able to get around. The word of justification, for example, or righteousness, or atonement. You might have to explain what that means because as you have someone visit, they probably won't know what that word is. And so you have to be very careful about that. Now, connected with this is consider the version that you read. When you are teaching and preaching, I know we all have our favorite version, and I've got mine, you've got yours. But is it a version that somebody can follow along with easily, that people can read along with you in the audience, and that really uses words that we use in everyday conversation? Now, I know you can go through and use a version like King James, and that's fine. And you may say, hey, I've got a dictionary and I can look at these words. Well, there's two things about that. One, words do change meaning. And second, not everybody has a dictionary with them. And so as you're trying to communicate to people, you have to be very careful about the version. And so here's just a good standard. Your concepts, your ideas, your language should be able to be understood by a student in middle school or by a teenager, like a high school student, something like that. If you can explain it in terms that they can understand and that are easy enough that they can grasp the language and that kind of thing, I think you're doing pretty good. Because when you go out there and you talk with people that you're trying to teach, they're not familiar with the religious concepts, and if you speak at that level, you'll always be able to communicate. Alright, so the second thing with our teaching is that it relates to people. So all deep truths intersect with the daily life of people. That's just all there is to it. If it is a truth worth knowing, it is a truth worth shaping people's behavior. So when you think about this process, you need to think about how does this story, illustration, idea, whatever, this scripture, how does it relate to someone? How does it connect with someone? And one way that you can do this is actually through stories. Stories are the most persuasive way of communication. They are very important to match up thinking. This is all from Talk Like Ted, if you've read that book, and there's some information in there. But when you look at those ideas, it's about making the information stick with someone, making it relatable, helping them to see, oh, here's how this connects into my normal life. And so I understand that, and now I'm changed and I'm different. And so if it's just a remote concept that people have no connection to, then you're losing your audience. It needs to be something that they can understand, especially as a visitor. A visitor needs to know, how does this impact them? Now, the third one is teaching that respects the audience. Now, what I mean by this is you don't want to insult your audience, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Now, I've been told plenty of times to never underestimate the ignorance of your audience. And that's true. You never underestimate the ignorance. But you also don't want to tell them how ignorant they are. So be very careful with this idea. If you're talking down to your audience or demeaning them or saying you instead of we or even I, myself, those types of things, those are ways that you just kind of build friction between the audience and yourself. So what I'm saying is you got to stand for the truth, but don't go through and insult other groups and people. Now, if they've got insincere motives and it's becoming very clear, you have to call that. That's what Jesus did. But that was a kind of a different situation in the sense that he knew the hearts, he'd seen their actions and that kind of thing, and he wasn't just going around blanket just hitting all kinds of people. He's hitting specific groups that have caused him enormous issues. And so when you're in the pulpit, you don't just need to go through and just blanket broadcast all the time about all kinds of people and say things really to them that you wouldn't say to their face. See, it's just not cool. So just don't insult people like that. And kind of connected with that is if you're talking about a false doctrine, and this may be agnosticism or some other false doctrine, whether it's religious or non-religious, please don't use straw men. If you use straw men, first off, it irritates the people that actually believe those positions because they might say, I don't actually believe that, or I believe something like that, but that's not really what I believe. And more than that, it may seem like you initially are winning and pulling it down something and you pulling down their argument and you are looking like you've answered the question, but if it's not actually what the question was, your audience may like it then, but if they run into that situation, they won't really have the answer, and you're already insulting the people because it's not actually what they believe. I wouldn't want that done to me, and I don't want that to be done to somebody else. It's the idea of the neighbor rule. So what we need to do is respect the intelligence of the audience. They are human beings, just like you and me. They believe things for a reason. Now, that reason may be wrong, but they still need to be corrected in gentleness and respect. I think 2 Timothy 2, with the servant of the Lord, has a lot to say about that. Now, number 4 is teaching that doesn't exclude others. So what I mean by this is it's easy to go through and say things like, we all know, or you know the story of Abraham, or you know the story of Job, or you know the story of Jonah. Well, here's the thing. If somebody just came in and they didn't have a religious background, guess what you just did? In a way, you kind of insulted them, or at least made them feel uncomfortable because it's something they don't know. Well, and the thing is, should they know it? Sure. I mean, they should have been taught, hopefully. But guess what? They weren't. So you have to be very careful about that. And so how do you offset that? Well, you try to think, what might my audience not know, and what do they need to know to follow my point? And so you're trying to explain it again, kind of in terms they understand. Now, more than that, another thing you can do for them to follow, and that they're not excluded, is to make it to where they can follow the points very easily. You know, I've heard this expression before, and I'm sure I've done it, where people have gone everywhere preaching the word, right? And so there's some problems with that. First, it's hard to follow people if they're going everywhere. So you need good slides that help to kind of give your points. We've talked about this. If you want to go back in some of the videos, I'll give some good tips on how to do that. But one way you may do this as well is, why don't you just go to one place? And you can refer to other text. You can maybe put the actual verse that you want into your PowerPoint so that they don't have to turn there. or maybe just to limit it to 2 or 3 places that are maybe reasonably close in proximity, that type of thing, or even in a book. I think the reason that that's so beneficial is that if you have a visitor come in, they have no clue where the book of Obadiah is, or whatever, that you can have someone sit by them, help them to get to that one text, and then you stay there, and then you look and you see what the point is from that text, and they can follow it. And I just think there's a lot of gold in that. There's a lot of value, and so you're helping somebody to follow along in the process. Now, the last thing is teaching that gives people hope. That's what our job is. That's what our mission is. And so you might hammer on some issues, but don't leave people beaten down. You might be talking about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or something like that, and it's a very serious topic that people need to hear. But you don't want to just go through and say, here's all the problems, and then say, okay, now we're done. Well, that's not really where you want to end. See, all sin has the answer of Jesus and the gospel. And so you may have bad news for people, but it needs to always have good news on the other side of this, to where people can be shown that there's a change that can come about, that they can be helped, and that they can ultimately have the answer. Give them hope of what can be in the future. Because the truth is, there is a much better place for all of us ahead of us. So you want to motivate people not just so that they will be feeling bad about their sin, but so that they will ultimately lay those things down and be willing to sacrifice them for something that's much better in a relationship with God. So anyway, there's my 5 today. If you have any more comments about this, things that you think are good as you have visitors come in, I'd be glad to hear them. Or maybe you have some other type of comment, throw it down there. And so if you haven't already, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe. Just make sure you hit that bell. Thanks for checking us out. Have a good one. We'll catch up with y'all next week.